So for number 2, we are subtracting our two fractions together. We already have a common denominator, so we can just subtract our numerators. And then the denominator stays the same. So we have x minus 3 over 9x squared. Always check to make sure if you could simplify your fraction. If you can simplify it, make sure you simplify. Here we can't simplify anything. We've got x minus 3 on top. We don't have an x minus 3 on the bottom that we can cancel out with. So it's as simplified as it can be. Let's look at number 3. So same thing here, we're subtracting. We already have a common denominator, so we're just going to combine our numerators together. So we have 7 minus 3x over x minus 2. The denominator stays the same. All right, let's do number 4. So 4 says find the least common multiple of the expression. So least common multiple is the same thing as the least common denominator, which we've been doing in almost every single question. So we want to break down each of our factors here. The comma separates the factors, or separates the two terms. First one is 3x squared. So if we broke this down into all the factors, we're just breaking it apart. 3 would just be 3. And x squared would be x times x. How could I factor 6x minus 18? I can take out a 6, and then we have x minus 3. What are two factors of 6? 3 and 2. So for our least common multiple, which is the same thing as the least common denominator, we always start by listing everything from our first factor. So you have 3 times x times x. Then we can move on to our second factor, or second term. Do I already have a 3 on my list? Yeah, so we don't have to list that one again. Do we have a 2 on the list? Nope, so we got to include 2. Do I have an x minus 3 on the list? Nope, so we have to include the x minus 3. Now let's simplify it and combine the like terms together. 3 times 2 would be 6. X times x, x squared, and then x minus 3. You don't have to distribute the 6x squared out. If you wanted to, you could, but you could just make it like this. But just make sure if you have two numbers that you're multiplying, multiply them together. If you have two x's, combine them together. This would be our least common multiple. All right, so for 7, we want to factor the x squared minus 3x minus 10. So what are two factors of negative 10 that add to negative 3? Negative 5 and 2. So this breaks down into x minus 5 and x plus 2. And then our second term is just x plus 2. So for our least common multiple, we start by listing everything from the first one. So x minus 5 times x plus 2. And then when we move on to the second one, do I have an x plus 2 on the list already? Yep, so we don't have to include that. So our least common multiple would be x minus 5 times x plus 2. So with 11, we want to subtract these. We can't subtract them right away because they have different denominators, so we have to find our least common denominator. So both of the denominators are already as factored as they can be. We have an x plus 4 and an x minus 3. So for our least common denominator, we're going to list everything from the first one. So that's just x plus 4. Moving on to the second denominator, do we already have an x minus 3 on the list? No, so we have to include an x minus 3. So our least common denominator, which is going to be the denominator in our answer, because we're just subtracting these. We're not solving for x here. We're just subtracting them together. So our answer is going to have a denominator. It's going to be x plus 4 times x minus 3. So we did step 1. We found the least common denominator. What's step 2? Multiply by what? By the missing ones. So what's our first fraction going to get multiplied by? x minus 3. What's the second one going to get multiplied by? X plus 4. I'm going to do the math down on the bottom here. It's just so we have more room. We have 6 times x minus 3 minus, don't forget the sign in the middle, so minus 5x times x plus 4. What would we do next to simplify? Distribute, so we can distribute the 6 and distribute the negative 5x. So 6x minus 18 minus 5x squared minus 20x. Now let's combine our like terms and put it in standard form. What's going to go first? Negative 5x squared. Then we have 6x minus 20x, which would be what? Negative 14x. And then lastly, negative 18. So this is our numerator. We're just going to write this on top here. We have negative 5x squared minus 14x minus 18. So again here, when you are just adding or subtracting your two fractions together, you're not solving for x. Your answer is still going to be a fraction. So this is different than if it was equal to another fraction where we would have our answer just as x equals. Here our answer is still going to be a fraction. So don't forget your least common denominator is going to be the denominator in your answer. All right, let's do 12. So first thing we want to do is find our least common denominator. So let's factor our denominator, our first one. What are two factors of negative 18 that add to 7? Negative 2 and positive 9. Perfect. So this is x minus 2 and x plus 9. Our second denominator is just x plus 9. So for our least common denominator, we always list everything from the first one. So x minus 2 times x plus 9. When we move on to the second denominator, do I have an x plus 9 on the list already? Yep, so we don't have to include that one. So our least common denominator, or our denominator in our answer, is going to be x minus 2 times x plus 9. What do we do next? Multiply by the missing factors. So step 2, multiply by missing. So what's missing from our first fraction? Nothing. So we just have 14 on top. What's missing from the second fraction? X minus 2. So we have to multiply this one by x minus 2. So my numerator is going to be 14 plus 6 times x minus 2. So we just combine all of the numerators together. Now we have to simplify. What would we do next to simplify? Distribute the 6. So 14 plus 6x minus 12. 14 minus 12 would be 2. So 6x plus 2. So on top, we have 6x plus 2.
Does it matter if it's flipped here now?
It doesn't matter. You could leave it as 2 plus 6x. That would be fine. Usually you want to put it in standard form, so we'd put like the x one first, but it doesn't matter if it was the other way around. It's still right. All right, let's move on to 7.5. So let's look at number 2. So what do we do when we have a fraction equals a fraction? Cross multiply, perfect. So on top, we have 4 times x minus 2 is equal to 6 times x plus 2. From here, we just solve like a normal equation. What would we do next to solve? Distribute the 4, and we can distribute the 6. So 4x minus 8 is equal to 6x plus 12. What's next? Combine like terms. I can subtract the 4x, move it to the other side, and subtract 12. So negative 8 minus 12 would be negative 20 is equal to 6x minus 4x, 2x. And the last step, divide by 2. So what does x equal? Negative 10. It's always a good habit when you're solving your fraction equations here, just take a look at your denominators and your answer. What can we not have in the denominators? 0. The denominator cannot be equal to 0. So if I plugged in negative 10 plus 2, that's good. Negative 10 minus 2, not 0. That one's good too. So negative 10 would be our answer. So it's always just a good habit for every one of these questions. Once you get your x equals, just kind of plug it into the denominator. You don't really have to show work for that. You can just eyeball it, see if you get 0 in the denominator. Questions here? Let's do number 3. So when we have a fraction equals a fraction, what would we do to solve? Cross multiply. So we have negative 3 times x minus 5 is equal to x plus 1 times x minus 5. What is x minus 5 divided by x minus 5? 1. So we could almost just save ourselves the work and just call this 1 and still cross multiply and make it a little bit easier, because x minus 5 and x minus 5 are the same thing. But let's do it this way. We'll work it out. So on the left side here, we distribute negative 3x minus 5, minus 15, plus 15. Negative 3x plus 15 is equal to, how would we multiply x plus 1 times x minus 5? FOIL. So x squared minus 5x plus x minus 5. Combine our like terms. We get x squared minus 4x minus 5. What do we do next? Combine like terms. We see that we have an x squared and an x, so we know that we're going to have to factor. So let's move everything to one side, because when we factor, what does it have to be equal to? If we factor, it has to be equal to 0. So we've got to move everything to one side. So we're going to add 3x to the other side and subtract 15. So 0 is equal to x squared minus x minus 20. Now, what are two factors of negative 20 that add to negative 1? Negative 5 and 4. So x minus 5 and x plus 4. What would we do next? Set them both equal to 0. So x is equal to 5 and x is equal to negative 4. Now let's check our answers. It's always a good habit to check just to make sure both of our answers work. So let's start by plugging in 5. What are we checking for? To see if we get 0 in the denominator. We cannot have 0 in the denominator. 5 plus 1, is that 0? Nope, so we're good there. What about 5 minus 5? That's 0, so what does that mean? 5 is not an answer. Let's check negative 4 also. Negative 4 plus 1, is that 0? Nope, we're good there. Negative 4 minus 5, that'd be negative 9, so we're good there. So does negative 4 work? Yep. All right, let's do number 6. We're going to do 6, 9, 11, and 12. So looking at number 6, all it's asking here is to identify the least common denominator. So we're not actually solving, we're just identifying the least common denominator. similar to find the least common multiple, but here it's just we're looking at the denominators. So our least common denominator, first one is x plus 5. Second denominator is x, third denominator is x. So we always list everything from the first one, which is x plus 5. Now when we move on to the next denominator, do I have an x on my list already? No, be careful because x and x plus 5 are two different things. They are two different factors. So we don't have an x on our list already, so we got to include that. Moving on to the third denominator, do I have an x on the list already?
Yeah.
Yep. So what would our least common denominator be? X plus 5 times x.
Can you flip that?
Yeah, if you wanted to say x times x plus 5, that would be fine too. It could be, so just make sure you read the directions. It'd probably be more like the one on the last page where it said find the least common multiple. But just make sure you read the directions of the question.
When it says least.
All right, let's do 9. So for number 9, we have a fraction and a whole number on one side and a fraction on the other. So we can't just cross multiply. We're going to put 3 over 1 just so we can give it a denominator. But let's find our least common denominator first. So our first denominator is x minus 3. We got to list that one. You don't have to include the 1 because 1 times x minus 3 is still just x minus 3. So you don't need to put it. But moving on to the third denominator, do I have an x on the list already? Nope, so we got to include x. So our least common denominator is x minus 3 times x. What would we do next? We multiply by what's missing. We're going to multiply by the whole least common denominator. That way it'll cancel out with our denominators. So everything gets multiplied times x and x minus 3. X times x minus 3. X times x minus 3. Because if it's in the denominator when we're solving, we can just cancel it out. So we're technically only multiplying by what's missing here. So my first fraction, I have x minus 2 times x. Does anything cancel in the second fraction? Nope. So we have 3x times x minus 3. Does anything cancel in our third fraction?
Yeah.
What? The x. So here we have 2x times x minus 3. I'm going to write it on this side here so we have some more room. X minus 2 times x plus 3x times x minus 3 is equal to 2x times x minus 3. What would we do next to simplify? Distribute. So we have x times x minus 2, 3x times x minus 3, and 2x times x minus 3. So x times x would be x squared minus 2x. What's 3x times x? 3x squared minus 9x is equal to 2x times x would be 2x squared minus 6x. Let's combine all of our like terms. We've got an x squared here, an x squared here. X squared plus 3x squared would be 4x squared. Negative 2x minus 9x, negative 11x. That's equal to 2x squared minus 6x. What can we do next? Still want to combine our like terms, so I'm going to subtract 2x squared and add 6x. So we have 2x squared minus 5x is equal to 0. All right, what would we do next? If we have an x squared and an x, what do we have to do? Factor. How would we factor this? Take out an x. We're going to take out the GCF. So when we have two terms, they're either going to be perfect squares or factor by taking out the GCF. So we're going to take out an x, and we're left with 2x minus 5. What would we do next? Just like when factoring before, what would we do? Set them both equal to 0. Perfect. So we have x is equal to 0, and 2x minus 5 is equal to 0. So x is equal to 0. It's already solved for us. Next one, we're going to add 5 to both sides. So 2x is equal to 5, and divide by 2. So x is equal to 5 over 2. What do we have to do next? Check them. We got to plug them in to check. So if I plug in 0, 0 minus 3 is negative 3, so we're good there. What about 0 in our third one? Can I have 0 in the denominator? Nope. So 0 an answer? Nope, does not work. And then let's just try 5 over 2. 5 over 2 minus 3, is that 0? Nope. And then 5 over 2, is that 0? Nope. So does 5 over 2 work? Yes. So our only answer here would be 5 over 2. So looking at number 12, we want to find our least common denominator. How could I factor my first denominator? Take out an x. When we take out an x, we're left with x minus 2. Second denominator is x minus 2, and third one is just x. So for our least common denominator, we're going to list everything from the first one. So x times x minus 2. Moving on to the second denominator, do I have an x minus 2 on the list already? Yep, so we don't have to include that one. What about an x? Yep, we have a solo x too, so we don't have to list the other x. So we're good there. So our least common denominator would be x times x minus 2. What do we do next? Multiply by the least common denominator, so everything gets multiplied by x and x minus 2. So if it's already in the denominator, we can cancel it out. Does anything cancel from the first fraction? Both of them. We've got an x and an x minus 2. So what are we left with in our first fraction? 12. Second fraction, what cancels? X minus 2's. So what are we left with here? Just 3x? Negative 3x. Do not forget the signs. And then it's equal to, what cancels in the third one? The x. So 3 times x minus 2. From here, we solve. We're going to distribute the 3. So 12 minus 3x is equal to 3x minus 6. What's next? Combine like terms. We're going to add 3x to move it to the other side. And add 6. So 18 is equal to 6x. Last step, divide by 6. What does x equal? 3. Now let's plug our answer in just to check and be super sure. So 3 squared would be 9 minus 2 times 3 is 6. Is 9 minus 6 0? Nope, so we're good there. 3 minus 2, is that 0? Nope, we're good there. And 3, is that 0? Nope, so we're good there. So our answer is 3. All right, the ones on the bottom, find the inverse, they're highlighted, but I told you guys yesterday, you don't have to do those on the review. I think I told you yesterday. There's no inverse questions on the quiz, so you can take those off. don't have to do them from the review. So last one, let's do number 11. I'm going to write it on the side here so we have more room. 8 over x plus 3 is equal to x plus 8 over x minus 4. All right, I want you guys to walk me through this one. What do we do first? We could put the 1 under the 3. Perfect. What's next? Find the least common denominator. What would our least common denominator be? Awesome. X times x minus 4. Perfect. First denominator was x. We have to include that. Second one's 1. You don't need to put the 1. And then the third one was x minus 4. So we have to put that one on the list too. What do we do next? Multiply by the least common denominator. So x times x minus 4. X times x minus 4. And x times x minus 4. What do we do next? Cancel out the x's, perfect. So if it's already in the denominator, we can cancel it. So what am I multiplying in the first one? 8 times x minus 4. What about the next one? Everything. Nothing cancels here, so we have plus 3x times x minus 4. And then what about the third one? X minus 4 is cancel. So what are we multiplying here? X times x plus 8. What do we do next? Distribute. So we're going to distribute the 8, distribute the 3x, and distribute the x. Anybody want to read out what our equation would be? Coy, what'd you get? Plus 8 x. Do we agree? Awesome. Perfect. Good job, Coy. What's next? Combine like terms. So what like terms do we have on the left side? 8x minus 12x. What's 8x minus 12x? That would be negative 4x. Perfect. So we have 3x squared minus 4x minus 32 is equal to x squared plus 8x. What's next? Put them all on one side. We see that we have an x squared and an x. We know that we're going to have to factor. So subtract the x squared and subtract the 8x. So we got 2x squared minus 12x minus 32. What's next? Awesome. Let's take out the GCF before we factor. That way it'll make it a lot easier for us. So we're going to divide everything by 2. Since our GCF is just a number, we divide the 0 by 2 and it goes away. So we get, what do we have when we divide everything by 2? X squared minus 6x minus 16 is equal to 0. Awesome. What are two factors of negative 16 that add to negative 6? Negative 8 and positive 2. So what would we write next? X minus 8 and x plus 2. What's next? Set them both equal to 0. So x is equal to 8 and negative 2. What do we have to do next? Check them. Let's plug them back in. So let's start with the 8. 8 in our denominator, that's fine. That'll work. 8 minus 4 is 4, so it's not 0, so it works there too. So is 8 an answer? Yes. Let's do negative 2. Negative 2 in our denominator. Does that work? Yep. What about negative 2 minus 4? Yep, that'd be -6, so it's not 0, so it works there too. So is -2 an answer? Yep, so here we have 2 answers. So it's not always going to be the case that one of them cancels. Sometimes both of them may work.